She came off that train with blood on her sleeve and a derringer in her fist. A man in a gray coat grabbed her arm on the platform. She swung the suitcase into his face, heard the crunch, and didn't blink. Then she turned to the tall rancher standing there with his hat in his hands and said, "You, Ethan Walker, marry me. Today, not Sunday. Today." Ethan had asked for a quiet woman. God had sent him a storm. Friends, subscribe to the channel. Stay with me to the very end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Ethan Walker had written exactly one letter in 11 years, and he had rewritten it 9 times before he mailed it. He wasn't a writing man. He was a man who fixed fences and pulled calves and buried what he couldn't fix. But the winter of 1880 had been the longest of his life, and there had come a night in February when he sat at his kitchen table and realized he had not spoken a single word out loud in 6 days. Not one. He'd said his own name just to hear it, and his voice came out cracked like a door hinge nobody had oiled since the war. So he wrote the letter. To the Hartley Agency, Chicago. I am a rancher, 34 years of age, sound of body and clear of debt except what the bank holds. I have 400 acres, 60 head a house with a good roof and a stove that draws. I am a widower. I do not drink to excess and have never struck a living soul in anger. I am looking for a wife. Then the part he rewrote 9 times. I would ask for a quiet woman. I have had enough noise in my life. I do not need a woman who is beautiful or clever or fond of society. I need one who can abide silence, because silence is most of what I have to offer. He had signed it respectfully E. Walker, and he had walked it to the post office in a snowstorm, because if he'd waited until morning, he'd have burned it. 5 months later, he was standing on the platform at Willow Creek with his good hat in his hands, sweating through a shirt he'd ironed himself badly, and the 4:15 out of Denver was screaming into the station 40 minutes late. Old Pete Salazar leaned on the freight cart and grinned at him with 3 teeth. You look like a man going to the gallows, Walker. I look like a man waiting on a train. Same face. My daddy had the same face both times. Pete spat. What'd you ask her for anyhow? Somebody quiet. Pete laughed so hard he had to sit down on the cart. Boy, he wheezed, you asked God for quiet. Out here, son, God don't stock that item. Ethan didn't answer. He was watching the cars. He'd built a picture in his head over 5 months the way a lonely man will, and the picture was a small pale woman with her hands folded and her eyes down. A woman who'd say yes all right, and if you think best, and then go quiet again, and the two of them would move through that house like 2 clocks in different rooms, never touching, never breaking anything. That was what he wanted. That was all he wanted. A wife who wouldn't ask him about Sarah. The doors banged open. Passengers came down a drummer with sample cases. 2 nuns, a family of Swedes, a card player with a face like a closed fist. Then, nothing. Ethan stood there with his hat in his hands, and the platform emptied out, and his ears started ringing, and he thought, well, there it is. She got a look at Montana out the window and stayed on. He had just put his hat on when he heard the scream. It came from the last car. Not a woman's scream, a man's high and outraged, the sound a man makes when something has gone wrong that he'd been assured would go right. Then the doors at the end of the car came open, and a woman came out of them backward fast, like she'd been thrown, except she hadn't been thrown because her feet caught underneath her, and she landed square. She had a worn suitcase in one hand. Her sleeve was soaked dark from the elbow down. A man came out after her in a gray traveling coat and a bowler hat, holding a handkerchief to his mouth, and he got a hand on her arm above the elbow and yanked, and Ethan heard him say perfectly clear across 40 feet of platform, "You will get back on this train or so help me God." She swung the suitcase. She didn't swing it wild. That was the thing Ethan noticed, and he noticed it the way you notice a rattlesnake, before you've had time to be afraid of it. She swung it low and level the way a man swings a maul, and it caught the fellow across the jaw and lifted his hat clean off, and he went down on the boards with a sound like a dropped sack of feed. Then she reached into her coat, and Ethan Walker, 34 years old, 400 acres sound of body, watched a woman in a faded blue dress bring out a two-shot derringer and hold it steady on a man lying on his back on the Willow Creek platform. Nobody moved. Pete Salazar didn't even breathe. "Get up," she said. The man got up on one elbow. "Clara." "Get up." He got up. "Now get back on that train," she said. Her voice was low. It didn't shake. That was the second thing Ethan noticed. "And you tell him I said it's over. Tell him I said if he sends another man, I'll send him back the same way, only I won't be so generous with the second barrel." "You are being hysterical." She cocked it. The sound was very small and very loud. The man in the gray coat looked at her face for about 2 seconds. Then he picked up his hat, and he got back on the train, and he did not look out the window. The 4:15 pulled out, and the woman turned around. She had dark hair coming loose from where it had been pinned that morning by somebody with a better morning than this one. She had a face that under other circumstances a man might have called beautiful, though beautiful wasn't the word that came to Ethan just then. The word that came to him was weather. Like standing on the North Ridge in August watching a green wall come up out of the bitter roots and knowing you've got maybe 9 minutes. She looked at his hat. She looked at his hands. She looked at the wagon behind him and the brand burned into the tailgate. "You Ethan Walker?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She put the derringer away like a woman putting away a hairpin. "Marry me. Today. Not Sunday. Today." Ethan stood there. "Ma'am," he said finally, "you've got blood on you." She looked down at her sleeve like she'd forgotten it was there. "It ain't mine," she said. He got her in the wagon. He wasn't entirely sure how. Somewhere in there, Pete Salazar had lifted the suitcase up, and Pete's hands were shaking, and Pete had been on the wrong end of 2 Apache winters and a bank robbery, and Ethan had never once seen his hands shake. "Walker," Pete said quietly, "you want I should get the sheriff." "For who?" Pete opened his mouth, closed it. "Yeah," he said. "That's the trouble, ain't it?" Ethan climbed up. She was already sitting with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and if you cut her sleeve off, you'd have thought she was going to church. He picked up the lines. He didn't slap them. "Ma'am," he said, "I'd like to know your name." "Clara Whitmore." "That's what the letter said." "Then you know it." "I know what the letter said." He turned and looked at her. "The letter said you were a quiet woman of good character seeking a peaceable home. The letter said you liked to sew." For the first time something moved in her face. It was very small, and it wasn't a smile. "I do like to sew," she said. "I'm very good at it, better than you'd think. That fellow on the train is gone." He said your name. "A lot of men say my name, Mr. Walker. It doesn't mean they know me." Ethan sat there with the lines in his hands, and the horses shifting, and the whole town of Willow Creek, all 400 souls of it, watching from the porch of the mercantile, and the door of the barber shop, and the window of the silver bit. And he understood with perfect clarity that everything he did in the next 60 seconds would be the thing they said about him at his funeral. He said, "I asked for a quiet woman." And Clara Whitmore turned and looked at him full in the face for the first time, and her eyes were gray and absolutely dry, and she said, "Mister, I haven't made a sound in 6 years. There's nobody quieter than me alive." Her chin came up. "But if you're asking whether I'll be convenient, no, I won't. You want convenient, put me back on the eastbound and you can have your $40 off the agency. But you'd best do it now, because in about a day and a half, a man is going to come to this town looking for me, and after that, it won't matter what you want." The wind came up the street and moved the dust. Ethan Walker looked at that dust for a long moment. Then he said, "Preacher's at the far end, Pastor Coyle. He'll be at supper." "Then we'll interrupt his supper." "He don't like that." "Mr. Walker," Clara said, "I have interrupted better men than Pastor Coyle." And Ethan Walker, who had not laughed since November of 1876, who had buried a wife and a daughter 3 days apart, and had not laughed at the funeral, or after it, or once in all the empty years between made a sound. It was rusty. It came out sideways. It surprised them both. He slapped the lines. "Yeah," he said. Pastor Coyle was at supper. He came to the door with a napkin still tucked in his collar and a fork in his hand and stopped dead. "Ethan, need you to marry us, Pastor." Coyle's eyes went to Clara, went to the sleeve, went back. "Son," he said carefully, "is that blood?" "It ain't hers," Ethan said. Coyle's fork lowered. "Well," he said, "that's not the reassurance you seem to think it is." Clara stepped forward. "Pastor," she said, "my name is Clara Whitmore. I am 26 years old. I am of sound mind, and I am not married, not promised, and not property. I came out here on a lawful arrangement with the Hartley Agency of Chicago and Mr. Walker's letter, which I can produce. I am asking you to do your office. If you won't, I'll ride to Bozeman and find a man who will, and I will remember for the rest of my life which one of you it was." Coyle looked at her. Then he took the napkin out of his collar. He did it slowly, and he folded it, and he set it on the hall table, and something in the old man's shoulders changed the way a man straightens when he's decided. "Martha," he called back into the house, "put a plate in the oven." He reached for his coat. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I have been out here 31 years, and I have married cowards and drunks, and one fellow who was, I'm fairly certain, wanted in Kansas." He put his hat on. "You'll be a considerable improvement." They were married at 6:40 in the evening, with Pete Salazar and Martha Coyle standing up as witnesses, and the lamps lit because the sun was going down behind the bitter roots. Ethan didn't hear most of it. He heard "Dearly Beloved," and then a long stretch of nothing, and then Coyle was looking at him expectantly, and Martha was making a face, and he realized he'd been asked a question. "I do," he said. Then Coyle turned to Clara. "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man?" And she said, "I do," before he was finished, and she said it so fast and so hard that Martha Coyle flinched, and Ethan understood, with a coldness that went right down into his boots, that she wasn't saying yes to him. She was saying no to somebody else. Coyle got to the end of it. "You may kiss the bride." Nobody moved. Clara looked straight ahead. Ethan looked at the floor. "Or not," Coyle said. "It's not scriptural. It's a custom." Ethan put out his hand. Clara looked at it. And then Clara Whitmore, who had put a man on his back with a suitcase 4 hours ago and had not blinked, took Ethan Walker's hand and shook it like a horse trader, and her fingers were so cold he nearly said something about it, and he felt them shaking, and he did not say anything at all. He just held on a second longer than the shake required. She noticed. He saw her notice. "Well," said Pete Salazar into the silence, "that's the damnedest wedding I ever been to, and I was at mine." Jim D. The ride out to the ranch took an hour and 10 minutes, and neither of them said a word for the first 50. Then Clara said, "You want to ask?" "Nope." "You do." "Ma'am, I have wanted to ask since about 4 o'clock. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "But I figure a person who wants to tell you a thing tells you. And a person who don't, and pushing 'em only makes 'em better at lying." Clara turned her head and looked at him. It was the first time in 6 years anybody had looked at her like that. Not at her. Not the way her father's business partners looked at her across a dinner table pricing her. Not the way Richard Hale looked at her like an unsigned contract. Just looked and then looked away again and gave her the room. She hated how much it hurt. "You lost a wife," she said. "I did. The agency letter said so. It didn't say how." "No," Ethan said. "It didn't." And that was all he said, and Clara Whitmore, who had spent 6 years learning to read exactly how much weight a man could carry before he broke, recognized the shape of that silence, because it was the same shape as her own. She let it alone. Something in Ethan's chest unclenched a 1/4 inch, and he didn't have any idea why. The house was dark and cold, and smelled like a house that a man lives in alone. He lit the lamp. He built up the stove. He carried her suitcase to the back bedroom and set it down and stood there a second. "You'll sleep here," he said. "I'm in the front. Door's got a bolt on the inside. I put it there this week." Clara stopped in the doorway. "You put a bolt on my door," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Before you met me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Ethan looked at the floor. Then he looked at her, and his face was red all the way to his collar, and he said, "Because you were coming 1,000 miles to a house with a man in it you never met, and I figured that's a hell of a thing to ask of a person, and I figured a bolt don't cost but 40 cents. He shrugged, miserable. "That's all. I ain't saying anything by it. It's just a bolt." Clara Whitmore stood in that doorway, and for the first time since she'd come out of her father's house in the middle of the night in January with $14, and her mother's letters sewn into her hem for the first time in 181 days of running, her eyes went hot. She turned her face away so fast it was almost violent. "Thank you," she said to the wall. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am." "All right." "I'm your wife." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said, and then hurt himself and shut his mouth and went out and closed the door behind him like a man escaping a burning building. He stood in the hall a while. Behind the door, very quietly, he heard the bolt slide home, and then quieter still, he heard something he did not expect and would think about for the rest of his life. He heard a woman crying, not loud, not wailing, but the way somebody cries, who has taught herself to do it without making noise, because once upon a time, making noise cost her something. Ethan Walker put his hand flat on that door. He didn't knock. He just stood there in the dark with his hand on the wood for about 2 minutes, and then he went and slept in the chair by the stove with his boots on, the way he'd slept since 1876. She was up before him. That was the first thing. Ethan Walker had gotten up at 4:30 every morning of his adult life and had never once in his life come into his own kitchen and found coffee already made. She was at the stove in the faded blue dress with the sleeves scrubbed clean, and there was a pan going, and she didn't turn around. "You take it black," she said. "How'd you—" "There's no sugar in this house, and the tin of milk is from last summer." She poured. "Sit down, Mr. Walker." "Ethan?" "Sit down, Ethan." He sat down. He was aware that he had lost control of something and could not identify what. She put the plate in front of him. Eggs, bacon, biscuits. Ethan looked at the biscuits for a second too long. "They're not good," Clara said. "The stove runs hot on the left. I'll know better tomorrow." They're not good. Don't lie to me about biscuits. Ethan, we've got bigger lies coming." He ate 3 of them. Then he set down his fork and said, "All right. Say it." Clara sat down across from him. She folded her hands. "You're going to hear things about me by tomorrow noon," she said. "Some of them are lies. Some of them are true. I'd rather you hear the true ones from me." "All right. My father is Augustus Whitmore. Whitmore Shipping and Land, Richmond, Virginia. When I was 20, he arranged my marriage to a man named Richard Hale, who is 49 years old and who holds a great deal of my father's paper. The marriage was not a courtship. It was a settlement. Nobody used the word sold because we were all very well brought up. Ethan's jaw worked once. "I said no," Clara said. "For 6 years I said no. The first year my father argued. The second year he stopped my allowance. The third year—" Her hands were perfectly still on the table. "The third year he had a doctor come to the house, a specialist in the nervous complaints of women. Do you know what that is, Ethan?" "No. It's a man you pay," she said, "who writes on a piece of paper that your daughter isn't in her right mind. And once that paper exists, she isn't a person anymore. She's a condition. And a condition can be managed. A condition can be sent somewhere quiet." Her voice never rose. Not once. "There's a place outside Baltimore. I've seen it. He drove me past it. He didn't say anything. He just drove past it slow, and then he took me to lunch." The stove ticked. "So that's the true part," Clara said. "The man on the train works for Hale. There'll be more. Hale has a paper with a doctor's name on it that says, I am not competent, and he has money, and he has lawyers, and he is coming here. Not because he loves me. He's never once looked at me like a woman, but because I said no in front of people, and a man like that can survive anything except that." She stopped. Ethan Walker sat with his hands flat on the table. "You should have written all that in the letter," he said. Clara laughed. "It came out ugly." "And what would you have written back?" "I'd have written, 'Come on,'" Ethan said. Clara stopped laughing. She stared at him. "You don't know me," she said. "Nope." "You'd take all that on, for a stranger, because it was in a letter." "Ma'am," he caught it. "Clara, I have got 400 acres and 60 head and a banknote and no living kin, and if I died in the yard this afternoon, the only thing that'd change in this county is the hawks would eat better." Ethan looked at her steady. "You're asking what I'd risk. I ain't got anything to risk. That's not courage. That's just arithmetic." Clara Whitmore looked at this man for a long moment. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life," she said quietly. Ethan got up and put his hat on. "Yeah, well," he said, "you've had a sheltered upbringing." The mare's name was Juno, and she was 5 years old, and she had thrown 3 men and cracked Ethan's collarbone in April, and he'd been telling himself since May that he'd sell her. He hadn't sold her. He hadn't sold her because she was Sarah's. He was in the round pen fighting her at 9 o'clock that morning, and losing and swearing, and Juno was up on her back feet with her eyes rolling white, and he heard the gate. "Don't," he said without turning. "Stay out. She'll kill you." The gate opened. Ethan turned around, and Clara Whitmore was walking across the pen with her hands empty at her sides and her eyes down, and Ethan's heart went up into his throat so hard he couldn't get a word past it. "Clara!" Juno came down. She swung. Her ears went flat, and she came at that woman with her teeth bared, and Ethan was already moving, already too far, already knowing he wasn't going to make it. Clara stopped walking. She turned her shoulder, and she looked at the ground. Juno slid to a halt 11 feet away, snorting sides heaving, and Clara didn't look at her. Clara looked at the dirt. She stood there with her body turned away like the horse was the least interesting thing in Montana. 10 seconds. 20. Ethan couldn't breathe. Juno took a step forward. Clara took a step back. Juno stopped. Her ears came up. She took another step, and Clara moved away again, and something happened in the mare's whole body. The head came down, the jaw worked. She licked her lips like a colt. And then Sarah's horse. The horse nobody had touched in 4 years. The horse that had cracked Ethan's collarbone and put Tom Reyes in bed for a week, walked across 11 feet of Montana dirt, and put her nose in Clara Whitmore's hair. Clara reached up without looking and scratched under her jaw. "There," she said. "There now. Somebody hurt you too, didn't they?" Ethan Walker stood in the middle of his own round pen and could not move. "How?" he said. "How?" Clara didn't turn around. "You have to let them come to you," she said. "You can't chase a thing that's afraid. Every time you reach for it, you prove you're the one it should be afraid of." She was still scratching that jaw. "You have to be so boring and so still and so safe that after a while it can't remember why it was running." She said it very evenly. Then she said, "That's how they got me in the end. My father, Hale. They knew I'd run, so they stopped chasing. They just stood there, year after year, being reasonable, being patient. And I got so tired, Ethan." Her hand stopped. "I got so tired that one day I almost walked right up to them." The mare breathed against her collarbone. "What stopped you?" Ethan said. Clara turned around, and her eyes were that storm again, gray and rising, and she said, "My mother's letters." He didn't ask. He'd meant what he said in the wagon. He didn't ask. They worked. That was the strange part. That was the part Ethan would remember later when everything had gone to hell and the sky was orange and he was carrying water in a bucket with the skin coming off his hands. He'd remember that first day and how normal it was. She could ride. He didn't expect that. She could ride better than he could, and when he said so, she said, "Virginia." Like that was an answer, and he supposed it was. She fixed the fence on the north line wrong, and he showed her, and she did it right the second time, and never did it wrong again. She asked him at noon why he ran his cattle up the draw when the water was down in the bottoms, and he opened his mouth to explain it to her the way you explain a thing to a woman. And then he stopped, and he actually thought about it. Habit, he said slowly. My daddy did it. Was your daddy any good? He died broke. Well, Clara said and rode on. Ethan sat his horse in the middle of his own draw for a full minute. God damn, he said to nobody. Then, they came at 4 in the afternoon. 3 riders. Ethan saw the dust from the ridge and knew the horses before he could see the men, because there was only one outfit in this county that put every man on a bay gelding. Go in the house, he said. Clara looked at the dust. No, she said. Clara, Ethan. She reined around and looked at him. Do you know why they're coming? I know exactly why they're coming. Then you know it doesn't matter whether I'm in the house. Victor Blackwell rode up on a horse that cost more than Ethan's barn. He was 50 silver at the temples, and he had the most agreeable face in Montana. That was the thing about Blackwell. He'd bought out 11 outfits in 9 years, and every single one of those men had shaken his hand at the end of it and thanked him. He took off his hat when he saw Clara. Took it clean off. Mrs. Walker, he said. Victor Blackwell. May I say this county has been talking of nothing else since yesterday evening, and I'm pleased to report the talk did you no justice at all. Blackwell, Ethan said. Ethan. Blackwell smiled at him warmly, the way a man smiles at a nephew. Married, and you never said a word. I had to hear it from Pete Salazar. You want something? I want to congratulate you. Blackwell put his hat back on. And I want to say something else, and I'd rather say it in front of your wife than behind her, because I'm told she's a woman of sense. He leaned on his saddle horn. There was a man on the eastbound last night, Blackwell said pleasantly, with a broken jaw and a very interesting story, and he wired from Bozeman, and the wire came through the Willow Creek office, and Ethan, you know Dell down at the telegraph. Dell can't keep a secret in a bucket. Ethan's hands went tight on the reins. Now I don't know the particulars, Blackwell said. I don't want to, but I know a gentleman named Hale is coming out here on Thursday's train, and I know he's bringing 2 lawyers and a doctor. And I know what a doctor means, ma'am, in a matter like this. Clara said nothing. Her face was stone. So here's my offer, and it's a kind one. Blackwell spread his hands. Ethan, I'll buy the ranch, today. 12,000, which is 4,000 more than it's worth, and we both know it. You take your bride, and you get on the westbound, and you go to Oregon, and you start over where nobody's ever heard the name Whitmore. No court, no doctor, no town watching a lady get taken apart in the street. He shook his head sadly. Because that's what's coming. And you can't stop it, son. You haven't got the money, and you haven't got the friends, and this town will not stand up for a stranger against a rich man. They never do. Not once in the whole history of the world. The wind moved, and Ethan Walker sat there and felt the truth of it go through him like a nail. Because Blackwell was right. Blackwell was right. That was the horror of it. That was always the horror of Victor Blackwell. He never lied. He just told you the truth in the shape of a rope. 12,000. Blackwell said gently. Say yes, and by Thursday you're 400 miles from here, and nobody in Oregon will ever ask her a single question. That's not a threat, Ethan. That's a gift. I'm giving you a way out. And Ethan opened his mouth. And Clara said, Which one is it? Blackwell turned. Ma'am. Which section? Clara's voice was very quiet. You've offered him 50% over value. Nobody does that for grass. So which section do you want, Mr. Blackwell, and how long have you wanted it? Blackwell's agreeable face did not change. But something behind it did. Ethan saw it. It was like watching a window go dark in a house across a valley, a small thing, and then the whole building is different. Ma'am, Blackwell said, I don't believe I take your meaning. I believe you do. Victor, Ethan said slowly, answer her. Blackwell laughed. He laughed and put his hat back on and gathered his reins, and he was still the most agreeable man in Montana. Thursday, he said. Think it over till Thursday, Ethan. After that, I'm afraid I'll have lost the ability to be generous." He rode off with his 2 men, and Clara Whitmore watched him go, and she was so pale that Ethan thought she might come out of the saddle. "Clara." She didn't answer. "Clara, what was that?" She turned her horse toward the house. "Get down," she said. "I have to show you something, and I have to show it to you inside." She put the suitcase on the kitchen table. She opened it. There wasn't much in it. 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a Bible with the spine broken, a tintype of a woman with Clara's exact eyes. Then she took off her coat, and she laid it on the table, and she took a small pair of scissors out of the case, and she began to cut open the hem. "Clara, 6 years ago," she said, cutting, "my mother died. She was sick for 11 months, and my father visited her twice Ethan, in 11 months, and the second time was to have her sign something." The thread came away. "She didn't sign it," Clara said. "She waited until he was gone, and she sent for me, and she made me get on the bed with her like I was 6 years old, and she told me a thing that no one else alive knows." She pulled the hem open, and out of it, folded flat sewn between the lining and the wool, came a packet of papers wrapped in oilcloth. They were old. The oilcloth was cracked. Ethan could see the wax seal from where he stood, dark red, split down the middle. Clara set it on the table between them. "My mother's name was Eleanor Rush," she said. "Before my father. Rush. Her father came out to this territory in 1859 with a survey party, and he died out here in 1863, and he left his daughter exactly one thing." Ethan's mouth had gone dry. "Clara," he said, "what is that?" She unfolded it. It was a grant. It was a territorial grant with a seal and a surveyor's map inked on the back, and the map was a map Ethan Walker had been looking at his whole adult life because he had been born on it. There was the North Ridge, there was the draw, there was the creek that came out of the rock at the top of the property and ran down through it and out into the valley and watered every single outfit between here and Willow Creek. The creek Blackwell had been trying to buy for 9 years. 19 months ago, Clara said, Richard Hale bought my father's debt, all of it, and when he did, he got the inventory. And in the inventory, there was a note about a piece of Montana territory that my grandfather had recorded, and no one had ever developed, and no one had ever found the original grant for, because it wasn't in a bank. It was in a woman's sewing basket in Virginia for 18 years. Ethan couldn't feel his hands. "He's not chasing me because I said no," Clara said. "He'd have let me go, Ethan. A woman who runs is an embarrassment, but a woman who runs carrying the only original copy of the water rights to an entire valley." "Stop," Ethan said, "is worth 2 lawyers and a doctor and a private car. Stop." She stopped. Ethan Walker put both hands on the table and stood there with his head down and breathed. "You picked me," he said. Silence. "Say it." "Yes. You didn't get matched with me by any agency. You paid 'em. You paid 'em to send you here." "Yes." "To this ranch." "Yes." He looked up, and Clara Whitmore did not look away, and that was the worst part. She did not give him the mercy of looking away. "I paid Mrs. Hartley $80, she said. "Everything I had left. I told her I wanted Montana. She showed me 11 letters. Clara's voice finally cracked just once right down the middle. "And I read yours, Ethan. I read the part where you asked for a quiet woman because silence was all you had to offer. And I sat in a boarding house in Chicago with $80 and a man's hired killers 3 days behind me, and I cried because I thought—" She stopped. "Because you thought what?" Ethan said. "Because I thought a man who'd write that sentence was a man who'd been so lonely he'd forgotten to lie." Her hands were shaking. She let them. "And I thought, God forgive me, I thought that's a man I can use." The clock ticked in the front room. "So there it is," Clara said. "Now you know all of it. I didn't come here to be your wife. I came here because your ranch is the only place on earth where my paper is worth anything and my name is worth nothing. I used you. Blackwell wants your land because of my grandfather's creek. Hale wants me because of my mother's hem. And every bit of the storm that's coming down on your head on Thursday, I brought here in a suitcase and set on your table. She pushed the grant across the wood. "That's yours if you want it," she said. "Sign it, and I'm nothing to anybody. Sign it, and Hale gets off the train Thursday and finds a piece of paper worth $20,000 in the hands of a man he can't have declared insane. And I'm free, and you're rich, and I'll be on the westbound by noon, and you will never have to look at me again." Ethan didn't touch it. "And if I don't sign it, then they take it," Clara said. "Then they take me, and they take you with me, because you married me, and that makes you a man who married a lunatic for her money, and Blackwell will make sure this whole town believes it by Friday." She stood there in the faded blue dress with her chin up and her whole life on a kitchen table. "Sign it, Ethan," she said. "I'm giving you the way out. It's the first honest thing I've done in 6 years." Ethan Walker looked at the paper for a long, long time. Then he picked it up. Clara closed her eyes, and Ethan Walker walked across his kitchen and opened the stove, and Clara's eyes flew open, and she screamed, "Ethan, no!" and got halfway across the room and stopped. Because he hadn't put it in the fire. He was standing there, holding it over the open door, with the heat coming up off the coals, and his face like something carved. 6 years, he said quietly. 6 years of men telling you what that paper makes you worth. Your daddy, Hale. Blackwell would've if he'd known. He looked at her over the flames. And now me. That's what you're waiting for, ain't it? Standing there, waiting for me to be the 5th one. Clara couldn't speak. Ethan closed the stove door. He held the grant out to her, flat on his palm. "Take it," he said. "Ethan, take it, Clara. It ain't mine. It ain't your daddy's, and it ain't Hale's, and it ain't Blackwell's." His voice never rose. It didn't have to. "It's your mother's. She kept it 18 years in a sewing basket, and she gave it to her girl, and by God, not one man in this world has got a right to lay a hand on it, and that includes me." Clara Whitmore did not take it. She stood in the middle of that kitchen, and she started to shake, and it started in her hands, and went up her arms, and into her shoulders, and her jaw, and the storm that had been sitting behind her eyes for 6 years finally broke, and she made a sound like something tearing. Ethan set the paper on the table. And then Ethan Walker, who had asked for a quiet woman, took one step forward and put his arms around his wife of 18 hours and held on while she came apart. She fought him for about 4 seconds. Then she grabbed 2 fistfuls of his shirt and buried her face in his chest and sobbed like a woman who had been drowning for 6 years and had just in the last possible instant felt the bottom under her feet. He didn't say it's all right. He didn't say don't cry. He just stood there and let her. And after a while he said the only thing he had, "You ain't running anymore. That's all. That's the whole thing." His hand was on the back of her head. "You ain't running anymore because there's 2 of us now, and Clara, a woman alone, has to run." She said something into his shirt. "What?" She lifted her head. Her face was ruined, and her eyes were red, and she had never in her life looked less like a lady from Richmond. "I said Thursday," Clara Whitmore said. Ethan wiped her face with his thumb. "Yeah," he said. "He'll bring the doctor. Let him bring 100. Ethan, you don't understand what he is." "No," Ethan agreed. "But he don't understand what you are either." He looked down at her. "And I've been married to you for 1 day, and I already know that's a hell of a mistake for a man to make." Outside, the wind came down off the bitterroots and moved through the yard. And somewhere on the eastern edge of the territory, a private car was being hitched to Thursday's train. Wednesday morning came in hard. Ethan was already gone from the chair when Clara woke, which she knew because she could hear him in the yard before the light was fully up, the rhythmic sound of the axe splitting wood with the kind of force a man uses when he's working something out in his head and not making progress. She lay there and listened to it. 18 hours married, a water rights grant sewn into a coat hem. A man named Hale on Thursday's train with 2 lawyers and a doctor and a neighbor who'd offered $12,000 for a ranch worth 8 because of a creek nobody had laid a legal finger on in 60 years. She got up. She made the coffee. She made it strong because she suspected they were both going to need it. She stood at the window and watched Ethan split wood in the early gray light, and there was something about the economy of it, the complete absence of wasted motion, that made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine. She had used this man. She had sat in a boarding house in Chicago and read 11 letters and chosen this one deliberately, with the cold precision of someone who had learned to survive by thinking 3 moves ahead, and she had told herself it wasn't personal, it was geography. It was the land grant and the deed and the simple arithmetic of her own survival. She had not counted on the bolt on the bedroom door. She had not counted on a man who would hold a paper over a fire and give it back. She set 2 cups on the table and went to the door. Ethan. He stopped mid-swing, set the axe in the block, came across the yard without a word, and wiped his hands on his trousers and came inside, and she noticed he'd taken off his hat before he came through the door, and she had no earthly idea why that undid her a little. He sat down. She sat down. They drank coffee in silence for a full minute, and it was, Clara realized with a start, the most comfortable silence she'd sat in for 6 years. She did not feel watched. She did not feel assessed. She felt like a person drinking coffee at a table with another person, and the simplicity of it was so foreign that it took her a moment to name it. "I have to tell you something else," she said. Ethan set down his cup. "How bad?" "It depends on how you define bad." "Clara, Hale has a man here already." The muscle in Ethan's jaw went tight. "In Willow Creek," she said. "He got here before me. He's been here 11 days, boarding at the Grange house." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "His name is Daniel Price. He's a surveyor. He's been out in the county measuring things." "What things?" "The creek. Where it runs. Where it splits. He knows about the grant because he found my mother's lawyer in Richmond. The lawyer was an old man, and Price is very good at his job." She looked at the table. "He knows what the water rights are worth. He knows the legal argument for why the grant is valid. And he knows that if I marry, the property question becomes more complicated, not less. Which is why Hale sent that man on the train. Yes. He thought if he could pull me off before I married, he could file on the grant as abandoned property. My father's debt is his, which means he'd argue any asset your daddy held a claim on comes to him through the note." Ethan said it slowly. "But your mother's family held the grant separate from your daddy." Clara looked up. "You followed that," she said. "I'm not educated," Ethan said. "But I ain't stupid, Clara." "I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't." He picked up the cup again. "So him marrying you was simpler than going to court?" "Much. A wife's property is her husband's under Virginia law. We'd have been married by February, and he'd have filed on the grant by April, and I would have had no legal standing to dispute it, and—" She stopped. "And I would have been in that place outside Baltimore by summer, because a woman who disputes her husband's land claim is clearly not in her right mind." The clock in the front room ticked. "Price," Ethan said. "What does he look like?" "Thin, sandy hair. He'll be carrying a transit and a tripod, or he'll pretend to be done with them by now." She paused. "He has a scar through his left eyebrow. Knife." Ethan looked at her. "Don't ask," she said. "I wasn't going to." He stood up. He went to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a moment, and she watched his shoulders and tried to read them the way she'd learned to read her father's, which was a language made entirely of tension and silence. She couldn't read Ethan's. They were different. "Tom Reyes rides for me," Ethan said. "Good man. He'll have seen a stranger on a horse with survey equipment in the last week and a half out north on the creek line." He turned around. "I need to talk to Tom before I do anything else, and you need to stay here." "Ethan, not because I'm trying to manage you," he said, and his voice was patient in a way that was clearly costing him something. "Because Price is watching the property. If he sees you on the north line, he knows you've connected the dots, and he'll wire Hale before noon to push up the train." Clara sat with that for a moment. She hated that it was correct. "All right," she said. He looked almost startled. "All right. You're right. I'm staying." She stood up and started clearing the cups. "But Ethan, when you talk to Tom, don't tell him everything. Tell him enough to get what you need and no more." "Tom's trustworthy. I'm sure he is. But there's another man boarding at the Grange House who's been here 11 days, and the Grange House dining room seats 12, and people talk. She set the cups in the basin. Information is the only thing I've got right now. Every person who knows all of it is another place it can leak from. Ethan put on his hat. He stopped in the doorway. You think like this all the time, he said. Every day for 6 years, Clara said. You get very fast at it. He looked at her for a moment, with something on his face she couldn't quite name, and then he went out. Clara stood in the kitchen and breathed. Then she went to the suitcase and took out her mother's grant, and she sat down at the table, and she read every word of it for the 47th time, looking for the thing she'd missed. The crack, the flaw, the place where a lawyer with enough money could put a lever and pry. She didn't find it. She didn't find it because there wasn't one, and she knew it, and she had always known it. What she was really doing was holding the only thing her mother had ever been able to give her. She folded it back into the oilcloth. All right, Mama, she said quietly. Let's see. Tom Reyes came back with Ethan at 9:30, and Clara knew it was trouble before they got to the door, because neither man was talking. When two men ride in together from a difficult conversation, and they're quiet, it means the conversation landed harder than either of them wanted. Tom was 28, compact and dark, with a face that was usually pointed at a laugh. He wasn't laughing now. He took his hat off when he came in and held it. Mrs. Walker, he said. Mr. Reyes, sit down. He sat. Ethan didn't. Tell her, Ethan said. Tom put the hat on his knee. That surveyor, he said carefully, was out on the North Line 6 days in a row. I thought he was county work, so I let it go. But he didn't come in from the county road, he came in from Blackwell's side of the ridge. The room went very quiet. Every morning, Tom said, he'd ride out from the Grange House, go up through the gap in the north fence. What gap? Ethan said sharp. That's the other thing. Tom turned his hat by the brim. The gap wasn't there 10 days ago. Wire's been cut clean, boss, which means it wasn't an accident. And I've been out on the south line and didn't see it until this morning when I went looking. Ethan's face had gone the particular still of a man doing arithmetic that is not going his way. Blackwell let him through, Clara said. Yes, ma'am, has to be. She looked at Ethan. He already knew, she said. When he rode out yesterday, he already knew about the grant. He wasn't offering to help us. He was testing whether I'd told you. She let that settle. And I hadn't yet. So he knows I was keeping it from you, which means he thinks there's a crack between us, Ethan said. Yes. And if there's a crack, he can put money in it. Ethan turned to Tom. How long would it take Price to get a wire to Bozeman and back? 3 hours maybe, if he sends it today. Then he hasn't sent it yet, or Hale'd be riding in on the night train. Ethan looked at Clara. Price hasn't reported to Hale that you're here and married. Which means he's waiting, Clara said. He's waiting to see what I do next. Or he's waiting for something else, Tom said. Both of them looked at him. Tom turned the hat again, which Clara was coming to understand was what Tom did instead of clearing his throat. There's a man at the Grange House, Tom said slowly. Been there 12 days. Sandy hair, scar, talks to nobody. I've seen him twice in town, and both times he was watching the telegraph office. He looked at Ethan, not using it, watching it. The realization moved across the room like cold air. He's not waiting to wire Hale, Clara said. No, Tom said. I don't reckon he is. Don't reckon. He's waiting to intercept something. She pressed her fingers flat on the table. He's watching who wires out. He wants to know if Ethan contacts a lawyer. Ethan's eyes went to her face. Is there a lawyer? He said. In Bozeman. In Helena. Anyone who knows about the grant. There's one man, Clara said. My mother's original solicitor, James Aldrich Helena. He's 80 years old and he hasn't practiced in 12 years, but he's the one who drew up the grant transfer, and his signature is on the bottom of that document, and if Hale's lawyers try to challenge the chain of title, we need him here by Thursday, Ethan said. Ethan, that's 2 days. Can he travel? I don't know. I haven't contacted him. I've been afraid to contact him because every wire I send can be read and— Tom? Ethan said. Tom stood up. If I ride to the Ridge station at Millhaven, Tom said, already thinking, that's outside Price's sightline from town. I can put a wire through the Millhaven operator direct to Helena that won't pass through the Willow Creek office. How long? 6 hours there, 6 hours back. Wire goes 40 minutes. If Aldrich can travel, he'll be on tomorrow's evening train if the answer is yes. Tom was already moving toward the door. He stopped and looked at Clara. Ma'am, is there a word, something I can put in the wire that he'll know it's from you and not from them? Clara thought. Tell him Eleanor's daughter says the sewing basket is open, she said. He'll know. Tom nodded, put his hat on, and was gone. They heard him in the yard, and then hoofbeats fast up the road, and then nothing. Ethan sat down. He poured himself what was left of the morning's coffee, which was cold, and drank it like it wasn't. If Price sees Tom leave, Clara said. Tom doesn't go north. He goes south, cuts east through the rafter J fence at the bottom property, and comes up on Millhaven from the backside. Ethan set the cup down. He's done it before. There was a thing 2 summers ago. I don't need to explain it. I wasn't going to ask. I know. He looked at her steadily. You do that a lot. Do what? Not ask. He turned the cup in his hands. Most people push. Seems like you've learned to go very still instead. Clara thought about the round pen, about Juno. It works on horses, she said. It works on people too. He paused. It's working on me right now, and I'm aware of it. Something moved in Clara's chest. I'm not, she started. I know you're not, Ethan said. That's why it works. They sat with that for a moment, and it was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that means something has shifted, and neither person is ready to say what. It was Ethan who moved first. He got up. He went to the window again. She was beginning to understand he thought at windows, and he said without turning, Tell me about Hale. Ethan, I've told you. Not the legal part. He kept his back to her. The what is he? As a man. Clara was quiet for a moment. He's 61 years old, she said. He married once when he was 30, and she died of fever within the year, and he never married again. And people in Richmond called that sad. But I've thought about it for a long time, and I don't think it was sad. I think he found marriage inconvenient, and she gave him the excuse to never try again. She folded her hands. He collects things. He's the kind of man who collects things, art, property, horses, and people when he can arrange it. He doesn't want what he wants because he loves it. He wants it because someone else doesn't have it yet. Ethan stood at the window. He's never raised his voice to me, Clara said. Not once. In 6 years of saying no, Richard Hale has never once raised his voice, and I think that is the most frightening thing about him. A man who shouts is a man who's lost control. Hale never loses control. He just rearranges the room until you're the one against the wall. She stopped. He had my father's desk moved into his own office, she said. Before my father was even dead. 6 months ago my father had a heart event, not fatal, but serious, and Hale came to the house and he sat with me in the drawing room, and he was very kind, and when I went upstairs to check on my father, I came back down, and the desk was gone. He said he was having it repaired. He said the veneer was lifting. She looked at her hands. The veneer was not lifting. He just wanted me to see that he could do it, that he could rearrange things in my house in front of my face, and there was nothing I could say, because we were both very well brought up. The clock ticked. He's going to get off that train on Thursday, Clara said, and he is going to be completely reasonable. He is going to speak about my well-being. He's going to use the word concern. He's going to look at you with exactly the right amount of pity, and he's going to say things that sound like he's trying to help and mean the opposite of help, and every person in that town is going to believe him Ethan because that is what he does. Ethan turned around. His face had something in it that she had not seen in it before. It wasn't anger she'd seen men angry, and this wasn't it. It was colder than anger. It was the face of a man who is doing arithmetic and not liking what he gets. "He sounds like Blackwell," he said, "without the charm." "Blackwell's charm is a tool," Clara said. "Hale's is a weapon." Ethan looked at her. "Different thing," he said. "Very." He came back to the table and sat down, and he leaned forward with his elbows on the wood, and he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it straight." "All right. I don't have a lawyer. I've got Crawford in Willow Creek who drew my deed and is mostly fine, but has never been in a courtroom in his life. I've got 400 acres that's mortgaged to the second fence line. I've got 60 head and a water situation that's been a problem for 11 years because Blackwell controls the east access, and I've been fighting it with stubbornness because stubbornness is cheaper than attorneys." He looked at her. "If Hale and Blackwell are working together, if the legal paper and the land pressure come at the same time, I've got maybe 4 days before this turns into something I cannot fight with stubbornness alone." "I know," Clara said. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I know that too. I'm telling you because—" He stopped. He looked at the table. "Because you came here alone, and whatever your reasons were, you're not alone now, and I need you to understand exactly what that means. It means I'm in this, not as your landlord, and not as the name on a paper." He looked up. "As your husband. And I need you to tell me everything, every last thing, because I cannot fight what I can't see." Clara sat across from him and felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. She felt like someone was standing on the same side of the room as her. "My mother's grant covers the creek from the source to the county line," she said. "If it's valid, and I believe it's valid, it supersedes Blackwell's access claim entirely. It also means the property question isn't about my family's debt anymore. It's about territory law, and territory law is federal, and Hale's Virginia lawyers don't know federal land statute the way a Helena attorney would. Aldrich, if he comes—" She spread her hands. "If he's well enough, if Tom gets through, if Hale doesn't move the train up." "What else?" Ethan said. "What else do you have? Not the grant. The other things." She looked at him. "My mother's letters," she said quietly. "Letters that say what?" "Letters my mother wrote to me over the last year of her life that she never sent." Clara's voice stayed even, because she had practiced this, because she'd had to practice it, because the one time she'd let herself read them without the armor on, she'd sat on the floor of a rooming house in St. Louis for 4 hours. She was ill. She had time to think. She documented things, Ethan, about what my father did, about what Hale told my father, about what the arrangement was in their own words written down in my mother's hand. They don't know about the letters. No, they don't know what she kept. They think she was a woman who sat quietly and died. They don't know she spent 11 months writing a record because she understood what was coming for me, and she couldn't stop it, and this was the one thing she could do." Clara folded her hands on the table very tight. "She couldn't give me anything else. She had no money, no property, no legal standing of her own. But she had her own handwriting, and she had the truth, and she gave me what she had." Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't say "I'm sorry," or "what a shame," or any of the things that fill air when there's nothing adequate to say. He just looked at her with those steady eyes, and the steadiness was better than sympathy. "All right," he said. "All right," Clara said. They sat there for a moment. Then Ethan said, "Price, you said he's thin, sandy hair, scar." "Yes." "And he's been at the Grange house 11 days. "Yes." "Then he was here before you even made your train reservation." He said it slowly. "He was here before you'd decided to come." Clara frowned. "I decided in Chicago, 3 weeks ago. And before that? I was in St. Louis for a month. Before that, Cincinnati. And before Cincinnati." She stopped. The color went out of her face so fast that Ethan stood up. "Clara." "Louisville," she said. Her voice had gone very flat. "I was in Louisville for 3 weeks. There was a woman there, Eliza Dowd. She'd been a friend of my mother's. I thought she could help me. I wrote to her from Cincinnati. I told her where I was going. Did she write back? She said she couldn't help me. She was kind about it, but she said she couldn't get involved. I understood. I thanked her, and She stood up. The chair went back. I told her I was going to find a solution. I told her I'd heard good things about the Hartley Agency, and that I thought Montana was far enough. She was breathing fast. She wouldn't have. Eliza wouldn't have. Clara. Ethan's voice was very quiet. Did she know about the grant? Silence. Did she know your mother had a deed to Montana property? Clara's hands were cold. She was there when my mother died, she said slowly. She was the one who my mother sent everyone out of the room and kept Eliza. She was the one who called me in afterward. She put the coat in my hands. She said, "Take this. It's cold outside," and I thought she meant the weather. The room was very still. She knew, Ethan said. She may have told him. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment. She may not have meant to. He is very good at finding out things that people don't intend to tell him. He is very good at being in the room when something is said. She pulled her hand down. But either way, he knew before I got to Chicago, before I picked your letter. He was never reacting to me, Ethan. He was ahead of me the entire time. No, Ethan said. He knew where I was going. He knew the general direction, Ethan said. Montana. He knew the grant was here. He put a man here. But he didn't know you'd already made a choice before Price arrived, because if he'd known the specific ranch, Price wouldn't have needed 11 days to survey the creek line. He'd have ridden straight here and made his offer to you before I ever got to the station. Clara stopped, worked it through. He knows Montana, she said slowly. He doesn't know which 400 acres. Not yet. Price is measuring. Price is measuring, Ethan confirmed. Comparing what's on the grant to what's in the ground. But a territorial grant from 1863 won't have matched the current survey lines exactly. They remeasured this county in 1874. He's recalculating which parcel matches the original description, Clara said, and he's almost done. He's been here 11 days. So we've got today, Ethan said, before he figures out it's this particular creek on this particular land and wires Hale exactly where to go Thursday morning. The morning sun had moved around to the west side of the house by now, and the kitchen had gone from warm to cool, and neither of them had noticed. We cannot stop him figuring it out, Clara said. No. And we cannot stop him wiring. No. So we can't stop Hale from knowing by Thursday exactly where to come. She was very still. What we can do is make sure that by the time he gets here, everything that needs to be in place already is. Ethan nodded. Aldrich, she said. Aldrich. He agreed. And the town. He looked at her. Hale needs the town, Clara said. That's how this works. He doesn't come in with hired men and guns, that's not his way. He comes in with lawyers and papers, and he does it in public, and he needs the town to watch because the town watching is what makes the paper real. The social pressure, the humiliation. She met his eyes. A woman declared incompetent in front of 50 witnesses is harder to undeclare than one declared in a closed room. So we need the town first, or at least not against us. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You know what this town thinks of you right now, he said, not unkindly. I came off a train with blood on my sleeve and a derringer and married a man I'd never met in the space of 3 hours, Clara said flatly. I know exactly what they think of me. Yep. It can change. In a day, people change their minds faster than they think they do when they have a reason. She sat back down. They need to know me before Thursday. Not all of them, not most of them, just enough. She looked at him. Who does this town listen to, Ethan? Who is the person who, when they speak, the others follow? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Not Blackwell, she said. Blackwell's the man they respect and slightly fear. That's not the same as listen to. No, Ethan said. It's not. He was thinking. Margaret Oren. Who? Runs the dry goods with her husband Dale. Been here 22 years. Nursed half this town through the fever of '77, including, for the record, Victor Blackwell's mother. He rubbed the back of his neck. She didn't like it, but she did it, and Blackwell sent her a case of canned peaches from San Francisco afterward, which she returned because Margaret Oren does not accept payment for what she considers her Christian duty. He looked up. She is the most respected woman in this county, and she is going to think you're chaos until proven otherwise. Then I need to prove otherwise. Today. Today. Clara stood up. I need to go to town. Clara. Not to the Grange house. Not anywhere Price can see me doing anything that matters. She was already moving, thinking. I need thread. I'll need a reason to go to dry goods for thread. Ethan looked at her. You're going to buy thread from Margaret Oren, he said. I'm going to buy thread from Margaret Oren, and I'm going to be exactly the kind of woman she can understand, and I'm going to give her enough of the truth that when Thursday comes, she has already decided which side she's on. Clara turned. Is she a woman who knows what it is to be afraid of something? A real thing, not a... Her boy died at Antietam, Ethan said quietly. She walked 2 miles in the snow to identify him. She walked back alone. Clara absorbed that. Then I know how to talk to her, she said. Clara. Ethan stood. He put his hands on the back of the chair, and he said it carefully. I need to say this once and only once. I'm not going to manage you, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. But Price is in that town, and he does not know your face yet, and if he's been here 11 days, then he may have a description from Hale, and the last thing we need right now is him wiring that you've been seen. Clara thought about that. You come with me, she said. I come with you. We go together, husband and wife buying thread. We stop at Margaret Oren's because I need thread for the curtains, and you introduce me because Ethan Walker walks into that store regularly and nobody looks twice. She held his gaze. It's not hiding. It's being boring. A boring wife buying boring thread. Ethan Walker looked at this woman for a long moment. Nothing about you, he said, is boring. Then I will have to work very hard this afternoon, Clara said. They went. Price was across the street when they arrived. Clara saw him the moment they turned off the main road, thin sandy, watching the telegraph office with the absolute stillness of a man who does this professionally. She did not look at him. She kept her hand through Ethan's arm, which she'd taken on the wagon step, without particularly thinking about it. And she said something light to Ethan about the quality of the road, and Ethan, God bless him, responded naturally, and they walked into the dry goods like a married couple who had been married longer than 18 hours. Margaret Oren was behind the counter. She was 53 and built like someone who'd decided to stop caring whether the wind moved her, and her eyes were the same blue as the November sky, which is to say the color of something that has no interest in your comfort. She looked at Clara. Clara met her eyes and said simply, Mrs. Oren, I'm Clara Walker. I need thread and I'd be grateful for your advice on what you carry. Margaret Oren looked at Ethan. She said. Very well, Ethan said. Better than you'd think. Margaret's gaze came back to Clara. I was told, she said, that you hit a man with a suitcase on the platform. I did, Clara said. Was he a man that needed hitting? He had my arm. Said Margaret Oren, and went to the thread drawer. What colors? They were in the store for 40 minutes. Clara bought thread and 2 yards of muslin and a pair of scissors she didn't need, and somewhere in the middle of it, Margaret Oren said without looking up from the muslin, I heard a man named Hale is coming Thursday. Clara's hands went still on the fabric. He is, she said. I've had men come to this town before, Margaret said, with lawyers, claiming they were there for someone's benefit. She smoothed the muslin. My advice for what it's worth, from a woman who sells thread. Please, Clara said. Margaret looked up. Don't run, she said. This town respects a woman who doesn't run. It's got no use for one who does, and it's got no memory for one who stays. She held Clara's gaze. If what he says about you isn't true, You stand here and you say so, and you say it loud enough that the whole street can hear, and you let them decide." She folded the muslin. "Can you do that?" Clara thought about the kitchen table, about the papers sewn into the hem, about her mother's handwriting patient and precise in the quiet before she died. "Yes," she said. "Good." Margaret put the thread in a paper packet. "Because he's going to say you're out of your mind, and I've been looking at you for 40 minutes, and you're the clearest-eyed woman I've seen come through this town in 10 years, and I am not the kind of person who misreads eyes." She said it with complete plainness, the way she might have said the muslin was good quality. Clara said, "Thank you, Mrs. Oren." "Margaret." She pushed the packet across the counter. "You call me Margaret, and you come back here Friday, whatever happens, and you let me know you're all right." They came out into the afternoon light. Price was still across the street, still watching the telegraph. He did not look at them. Ethan kept walking at an even pace. "Well," he said when they were past. "She's on our side," Clara said quietly. "Did you know she would be?" "No, but I knew she could be." Her hand was still in his arm. "There's a difference." They got back in the wagon. Price didn't follow and didn't wire they knew that, because Tom would have seen anyone come to the telegraph office from the ridge, and Tom would have found a way to signal, and the road home was empty and silent. It wasn't until they were halfway back to the ranch that Clara realized she was still holding Ethan's arm, and that he hadn't moved it. She let go. "Tom should be back by 6, Ethan said. "Yes." "If Aldrich can come?" "He'll come. He was my mother's friend for 40 years, and she died with his name in her letters, and he'll come." She folded her hands in her lap. "He's 80 years old, and it's 200 miles, and he'll come." Ethan glanced at her. "You sound sure." "I am." She watched the road. "That's the thing nobody who's ever underestimated me has understood. I know which people will come through. I can look at a person, and I know." She paused. "I knew it about you, too, from the letter." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "From the bit about silence," he said. "From the bit about silence," she agreed. "A man who knows what he has to offer is honest. A man who's honest will do what he says." She let the wagon rock under her for a moment. "I've spent 6 years around men who promised everything and meant nothing. You promised very little, and you've meant every word of it." The ranch road came into view. Ethan didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I put supper on before we left. It'll be done in an hour. Nothing fancy." "What is it?" "Stew." "Is there enough?" "There's enough for Tom and whatever madman we can get out of Helena by tomorrow night." He glanced at her. "And for Blackwell's men, if they ride through, though they'd eat standing." Clara laughed. It was a real one. Short and surprised, the kind she couldn't manage on purpose anymore, the kind that only came out when she wasn't watching for it. Ethan looked straight ahead, but the corner of his mouth moved. Tom came in at 6:10. His horse was blown and he was dusty to the eyebrows, and he had a folded paper in his coat that he'd ridden 2 hours with, like it was made of something breakable. He put it on the kitchen table. Clara opened it. "The basket is open. God keep you Eleanor's girl. Tell Walker his creek is his. Coming on tomorrow 7 o'clock. J.A." Clara set the paper down. She pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. "He's coming," Tom said. "He's coming," Clara said. Tom looked at Ethan. "Boss, I need to say something and you're not going to like it." "Say it." "On my way back, I came through the south end of town, the Grange house." Tom set his hat on the table. "Price was in the dining room when I rode past. He wasn't alone." He looked at Ethan steadily. Victor Blackwell was sitting across from him. The kitchen went very still. "They ate supper together," Tom said. "Comfortable, like men who have eaten together before." He picked up his hat. "I don't know how long Blackwell's known Price was here, but he knows now, which means—" Which means they know we went to town today, Ethan said. And they know we didn't wire out, Clara said. Because Price watched The Office all day. So they know we've done something they can't see, and that's going to move them. Tom nodded. How far? Ethan said. Does Blackwell's influence go in this county? Tom didn't answer right away, and the pause itself was the answer. Far enough, he said. Outside, the evening had come in full and quiet, and somewhere on the eastern line, a man named Hale was eating supper in a private car and watching Montana come up dark outside the window. And he was not afraid of anything, and he did not know, could not know, that the woman he'd spent 6 years trying to reduce to a signature was sitting in a kitchen 80 miles ahead of him, with a lawyer's wire in her hand and a neighbor on her side, and a husband who had held a paper over a fire and given it back. He would know on Thursday. Thursday was coming fast. Thursday came without mercy. Ethan was up at 3 in the morning, which was an hour before his usual 3 because he had not slept in any meaningful way, and lying in the chair pretending had stopped being useful. He built the fire. He put the coffee on. He stood in the kitchen in the dark and listened to the house breathe. Down the hall behind the bolted door, Clara was awake too. He could tell by the silence. Sleeping silence and wakeful silence are different things in a house, and he had been alone in this one long enough to know the difference. The sleeping kind is softer. The wakeful kind has edges. He poured a second cup and set it on the far end of the table and went back to the window. At 4:15, the bolt slid back. She came out in the blue dress hair already pinned, and she stopped when she saw the cup. "You knew I was up," she said. Thin walls. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup, and they sat in the dark kitchen without speaking, and it was not an uncomfortable silence, which still surprised him every time. "Tell me how today goes," she said. "Walk me through it." "Train gets in at noon. Hale's on it. His lawyer's his doctor. They'll go to the Grange house first because that's where Price is, and Price knows what we've been doing." Ethan turned the cup in his hands. "Blackwell will meet them there. They'll talk for an hour, maybe less, because Hale is not a man who wastes time once he's moving. Then they'll come out." "Where?" "One of two places. The sheriff's office first to file whatever paper they've drawn up, or straight to us." He paused. "If they go to the sheriff first, we've got 20 minutes. If they come here first..." "They'll go to the sheriff," Clara said. "Hale will want legal standing before he faces me. He'll want the paper filed so he's standing on ground that's already his when we meet." She was thinking it through the way she always did, fast and flat, like reading a map. "Who's the sheriff?" "Bill Cutter. Good man. Honest. He will follow the law exactly as it's written, which means if Hale's paper is in order..." "Is Crawford there, your deed lawyer?" "I sent word last night. He'll be at the office at 8. "And Aldrich gets in on the 7 o'clock. "Tom's riding to meet the train." Clara nodded. They had laid all of it out the night before, after Tom left, sitting at this same table with a lamp between them, and the papers spread out. The grant her mother's letters, the deed to the ranch, and a hand-drawn map of the creek line that Ethan had made from memory, which was more accurate than anything Price had measured, because Ethan had walked every foot of it for 11 years. It was as good a hand as they could play. Clara knew that. She also knew that in her experience, the best hand at the table didn't always win. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. If this doesn't go the way we need it to, if Aldrich isn't strong enough to counter what they've prepared, if Cutter has to honor the paper..." She set down the cup. "I need you to know that what you did, the bolt, giving back the grant, all of it..." She stopped. "It mattered. Whatever happens today. I want you to know it mattered." Ethan looked at her across the table. "It's not done yet," he said. "I know, but I've spent 6 years not saying things in case there wasn't another chance, and I've decided that's a poor way to live." He held her gaze for a moment. "It mattered to me too," he said. "All of it." He picked up his cup. "Now, let's go win." Tom arrived at the station at 6:45, 20 minutes ahead of the 7 o'clock, which was the earliest he could have made it from the ranch, and he'd clearly pushed the horse the whole way. He stood on the platform with his hat in his hands and watched the eastern distance. The train was on time. James Aldrich came off the second car with a cane in one hand and a leather case in the other, and he was 80 years old, and he looked every year of it. But his eyes when he found Tom's face were the eyes of a man who had driven 200 miles overnight and felt that this was appropriate under the circumstances. "You'll be Reyes," he said. "Yes, sir." Tom reached for the case. Aldrich held it. "I carry my own case, son," he said pleasantly. "I have done so since 1831, and I see no reason to stop." He looked around the platform. "Where is she?" "At the ranch, sir. We're headed there now." "And the other train, the one from the east?" Tom checked the board. "Noon," he said. Aldrich nodded once. "Then we have time to do this correctly, which is somewhat more time than I expected." He started walking. "Come along." He was in Ethan's kitchen by 8, sitting at the table that had held every important conversation of the last 2 days with the grant, and the letters spread in front of him, and his glasses on, and Clara sat across from him, and did not speak while he read, because she understood from the look on his face, in the first 30 seconds, that this was a man who needed silence to work, and she was very good at silence. Ethan stood at the window. Tom stood by the door. Aldrich read for 20 minutes. He read every letter. He read the grant twice, turned the map on its back, read the surveyor's notes in the margin, and made 3 small marks in pencil on a paper he'd pulled from his case. Then he took his glasses off and folded them. "Eleanor," he said quietly to no one in particular. Clara's hands went tight in her lap. "She told you," Clara said. "She told you to keep this." "She told me what it was worth." The old man set his glasses on the table. "She did not tell me how much it had cost her." He looked at Clara steadily. "I am sorry I did not come sooner. I am sorry I did not. There were things I could have done and I did not do them, and I am 80 years old, and I know how few chances a person gets to correct their errors." "You're here now," Clara said. He looked at her with Eleanor Rush's eyes staring back at him from her daughter's face, and he put his glasses back on. "Yes," he said. "I am." He tapped the grant. "This is valid. I will stake my license on it, what remains of it. The chain of title is clean. The territorial recording is correct for 1863 practice. Hale's lawyers will challenge the survey description because the 1874 remeasure moved the eastern boundary markers 3 chains north, but..." He pulled a folded paper from his case. "I wrote to the Territorial Land Office in Helena 6 months ago. When Eleanor told me what was coming." He set the paper beside the grant. It was a certification. Official seal. It confirmed the pre-1874 grant description as controlling for any property recorded before the remeasure. Tom made a sound. Ethan turned from the window. "You've had that for 6 months," Clara said. "I've had it for 6 months." Aldrich looked at her with perfect calm. "I did not know where you were. I could not find you. I have been sitting in Helena with this document and a great deal of coffee for 6 months waiting for you to surface." The room was very quiet. "She told you I'd run," Clara said. "She said you were smart enough to run. She said when you ran you'd go west because you'd always wanted west, and she said when you got to Montana find the creek and you'd come to me." Clara pressed her fingers over her mouth for a moment. She breathed. "All right," she said. "What do we do?" Aldrich was already pulling papers from the case. "We go to the sheriff's office at 10 o'clock, he said. "Before Hale's train arrives. We file first." He laid the papers in order with the precision of a man who had been doing this since before most people in the room were born. "Ethan, I need your deed. Crawford should have a copy." "He's at the office." "Good." "Tom, I need a witness who is not family, not employed by either party, and preferably someone who has lived in this county more than 15 years and has no financial relationship with Victor Blackwell." Tom said immediately, "Margaret Oren." Aldrich paused. "Dale Oren's wife, Dry Goods." "Yes, sir." The old man almost smiled. Eleanor would have liked her, he said. They rode to town in 2 wagons, which Clara thought was probably the least dramatic mode of transportation for what they were riding toward, and she was glad of that, because drama was coming, and it was better to arrive quietly. Crawford was at the sheriff's office. He was a small man, with ink on his fingers, who looked like he apologized for things frequently, but when Aldrich spread the papers in front of him, his eyes went sharp in a way that changed his whole face. "Lord," Crawford said, "that's the Rush grant." "You know it," Clara said. "Know of it." He looked up. "There's been a standing question about the creek's ownership since—" He stopped, looked at Ethan. "Since before you bought in, actually. There was a note in the title search. I flagged it. You said it wasn't a concern." "I didn't know what it was then," Ethan said. "It's a concern now," Crawford said, and reached for his pen. Sheriff Bill Cutter came in at 9:30. He was a wide man, in a better mood than the morning deserved, and the mood lasted until he saw the collection of people in his office, at which point his face did the specific thing a sheriff's face does when he calculates the likely shape of his afternoon. "Ethan," he said. "Bill." Cutter looked at Aldrich, at the papers, at Clara. "You're the new Mrs. Walker," he said. "I am," Clara said. "I've been hearing about you." "I imagine you have." Cutter pulled a chair. "Tell me." Aldrich told him. He was concise, which Clara appreciated, because the clock on Cutter's wall said 9:47, and the Eastern train was due in 2 hours and 9 minutes, and they were in a race they could not afford to lose by a minute. Cutter listened without interrupting, which was the mark of either a very smart man or a very patient one, and Clara thought probably both. When Aldrich finished, Cutter looked at the grant. He looked at the certification. He read the top letter, which was the most direct one, her mother's handwriting, steady even at the end. He set it down. "If I receive a filing from a man named Hale this afternoon," he said slowly, "and it conflicts with what's on my desk right now, priority of filing controls," Aldrich said. "What you stamp in this office at," he checked his watch, 10:04 this morning supersedes anything filed after it absent a court order from a superior jurisdiction, and the nearest superior jurisdiction is Helena, which is 2 days away, Cutter said. Minimum. Cutter was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to ask you something, Mrs. Walker," he said, "and I'd like you to answer straight." "Always," Clara said. "Is there anything in those letters that isn't true?" Clara held his eyes. "No," she said. "Is the document genuine?" "It is." "And the man coming on the noon train, what does he actually want?" "The water," Clara said. "Just the water. That's all it's ever been." Cutter looked at Ethan. "That creek waters 6 outfits below you," Cutter said. "You know that." "I know it." "If Hale gets control of the water rights—" "I know what happens," Ethan said. "I've been watching Blackwell try to do it for 9 years. Cutter picked up his stamp. He stamped the filing at 10:04, and the sound of it in that small office was the loudest thing Clara had heard since the Derringer cocked on the platform 2 days ago. Margaret Oren signed as witness. She'd come in at 10:01 without being asked, thread receipt in her apron pocket, and taken the pen from Crawford's hand, like she'd been expecting to need it. "Margaret," Cutter started. "Bill Cutter," she said. "I watched your mother deliver 3 babies in a snowstorm, and she didn't need your permission either." She signed. Crawford signed. Aldrich signed. Done. Clara stood in that office at 10:06 in the morning and felt the thing shift under her feet, not dramatically, not with music, just the simple, solid feeling of ground that wasn't moving anymore. Then the door opened. Price. He stood in the doorway with his transit case over his shoulder and his scar white against the red in his face. And he looked at what was on Cutter's desk, and the color went out of him like a lamp being turned down. "Sheriff," he said. His voice was careful. "I need to file a document." "Come back at 1, Cutter said pleasantly. "This is time-sensitive." "Everything in here is time-sensitive, son." Cutter was already sorting papers. 1 o'clock. Price's eyes went to Clara. She looked back at him. She did not look away. She had spent years learning to look away, and she was done with it. Price left. They heard him running. "He'll wire from the telegraph office," Tom said. "Let him," Ethan said. Tom looked at him. "Train's in 2 hours," Tom said. "What Hale hears now changes nothing that's already been filed." Ethan put his hat on. "Come on." They ate at the diner on the main street. All 5 of them, which Clara suspected was partly practical, and partly Ethan making a deliberate choice about where to be visible. Small towns notice where you eat. They notice if you're hiding. They notice if you're not. Margaret Oren ate with them, which meant half the town walked past. The window looked in, saw Margaret Oren having lunch with the new Mrs. Walker, and went home with a revised opinion. That was worth more than Clara could calculate. Aldrich ate soup and said almost nothing, which was the behavior of a man conserving himself, and Clara watched his hands around the bowl and thought about her mother's hands at the end, and about how some things a person carries forward and some things they lay down, and how you don't always get to choose which is which. At 11:40, they heard the whistle. The noon train coming in from the east. The diner went quiet. Not dramatically, conversations lowered forks. Paused heads turned toward the window with the particular studied casualness of people who are pretending not to pay attention. Ethan put down his coffee. "Ready," he said. Clara picked up her coat. "I've been ready," she said, "for 6 years." They came out into the street, and the train was pulling in at the far end, and the whole of Willow Creek seemed to have found reasons to be on the main street at noon on a Thursday, which Clara understood was Margaret Oren's doing, because Margaret Oren had been in this town 22 years and knew how to make things happen without appearing to. The passengers came off the noon train. A family with children, a cattle buyer, a man with a sample case, and then Richard Hale. He was exactly as Clara had described. 61. Silver. Agreeable in a way that was worse than hostility, because it offered nothing to push against. He wore a traveling coat that had been made by someone who understood that real money doesn't announce itself. 2 men with cases came down after him. The lawyers. Then a smaller man with a black bag who kept close to Hale's left shoulder. The doctor. Hale stepped off the platform and stood on the Willow Creek street and turned in a slow half circle, not hurrying, not looking worried, taking in the geography the way a man does when he's already decided what he intends to build on it. Then he saw Clara, and for one unguarded half-second, just one, just enough, something moved in Richard Hale's face. Not surprise. Hale did not do surprise, but something that was the precursor to it, the shadow of a man who has come to collect a thing and found it bolted to the wall. Clara stood on the street in her faded blue dress with her husband beside her and James Aldrich at her left hand, and she did not move. Hale composed himself in about a second and a half. She'd have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it her entire adult life. He crossed the street. He took off his hat when he reached them because he was very well brought up. "Clara," he said, "you look well." "Mr. Hale," she said. He looked at Ethan. "You'll be Walker," he said. His voice was warm, concerned. "I've heard a great deal about you in the last 2 days. I appreciate that you've looked after her." "She's my wife," Ethan said. Hale smiled the way a man smiles when someone says something that isn't technically wrong. "Of course," he said. "I understand. Though I think once we've had a chance to explain the situation fully, once you understand the nature of Clara's condition, you'll see that we all have her best interests at heart." "Her condition," Ethan said. "She has been under extraordinary pressure," Hale said gently. "For a long time. And under that kind of pressure, a person's judgment." "Mr. Hale?" Clara said. He turned to her. "I filed this morning," she said, "at 10:04. The grant is on record in this county, as of 10:04 this morning, in my name, with clear chain of title, back to 1863. Mr. Aldrich," she gestured, "drew the original document. He has the certification from the Territorial Land Office, confirming the pre-1874 survey description as controlling." Hale looked at Aldrich. Something in his face shifted. "James," he said. He knew him. Of course he knew him. Hale knew everyone, Richard Aldrich said, with the courtesy of a man who has long since stopped needing to be anything other than correct. "You've traveled a long way," Hale said carefully. "At your age." "Eleanor Rush asked me to look after her daughter," Aldrich said. "I am somewhat behind schedule." Hale's lawyer touched his elbow. He leaned down, and the man said something in his ear, quiet, fast. Hale listened. His face did not change. That was when Clara knew they'd won the first part. If there was a legal counter, Hale would have smiled. The fact that his face went perfectly still meant the lawyer had just told him what she already knew. Priority of filing, absent a superior court order, and the nearest superior court was 2 days away. "Clara," Hale said, and his voice had changed by about half a degree, which was all it ever changed. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. My concern has always been—" "I have my mother's letters," Clara said. He stopped. "All of them," she said. "Every letter she wrote me in the last year of her life. She documented things very carefully. Dates, conversations, specific words. She looked at him with 6 years of accumulated steadiness. She was a very precise woman. I think you knew that about her." Something moved across Hale's face. It was very quick. It was the first true thing she'd ever seen on it. "The doctor," said one of his lawyers, trying to recover ground, stepping forward with the black bag man, "is simply here to ensure that—" "Sheriff Cutter," Ethan said. Cutter materialized from the edge of the gathered crowd, which had been pretending not to watch from approximately 15 feet away. "Mr. Hale," Cutter said pleasantly. "Bill Cutter, County Sheriff. I wonder if your doctor is licensed to practice in Montana Territory." The doctor opened his mouth. "Because if not," Cutter continued at the same pleasant pitch, "there are some forms." One of Hale's lawyers put a hand on the doctor's arm. Hale stood in the middle of the Willow Creek Street and looked at Clara Walker née Whitmore, and the look lasted about 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, she saw him do the same arithmetic Blackwell had done 2 days ago and get the same answer and know it. "I see you've been busy," he said. "I have," Clara said. "Your mother's letters." He said it without any particular expression. She kept them. She kept everything. "They're admissible legally correspondence." "Mr. Aldrich can speak to that," Clara said. "I expect he will if it comes to it. In Helena. In front of a territorial judge." Hale looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked back. "Richard." Aldrich said simply, "Go home." And something happened in that moment that Clara had never seen before in 6 years of watching Richard Hale in every kind of room. He looked old. Not confused, not beaten, just old in the way of a man who has been very sure of a very great many things for a very long time and has just been handed a different kind of certainty. He put his hat back on. "I'll be at the Grange house," he said to his lawyers. "Get Crawford's office to pull the territorial filing records for the last—" "Already stamped," Cutter said. "My office, 10:04 this morning. You're welcome to come by and read it." Hale walked away. He didn't run. He would never run. He walked away across the Willow Creek Street with his lawyers and his doctor and his agreeable face, and the whole gathered crowd watched him go, in the way a town watches when it has understood what it just saw and has already begun deciding what it thinks. Margaret Oren came and stood beside Clara. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. And that was enough. Ethan was beside Clara, too close enough that their arms touched, and he hadn't reached for her hand, and she hadn't reached for his, and somehow the almost was more than most things she'd ever had. Tom said from somewhere behind them, "Price is at the station." They all turned. Price was on the platform with his transit case and his saddlebag. He was buying a ticket. Eastbound. He did not look at any of them. He had the self-possession of a professional who had been beaten cleanly and understood it and was moving on to the next job. Clara watched him go. Beside her, she heard Ethan exhale long and slow, the way a man breathes when he's been holding something heavy for a while. Then, everything went wrong. It went wrong quietly, which was somehow worse. One of Hale's lawyers came back across the street at a fast walk, and he was carrying a paper, and he handed it to Cutter. And Cutter read it, and Cutter's face did the thing it had specifically not done all morning. It went careful. "Ethan," Cutter said. Ethan turned. "This is a note from the Territorial Bank in Bozeman," Cutter said. He said it evenly, the way you say things when you're trying to not set off what the thing might set off. "Dated Monday, calling your mortgage." Clara's hands went cold. "Calling it," Ethan said. "Immediate repayment or foreclosure proceedings to commence." Cutter looked at him. "This was filed in Bozeman on Monday. It came on the same train as Hale." Ethan stood very still. "That's Blackwell," Tom said quietly. "The bank in Bozeman Blackwell sits on the board." "I know what bank it is," Ethan said. His voice had gone flat in a way she hadn't heard before. Clara's mind was already moving, already calculating, and she was furious at herself for not seeing it, for thinking they'd covered every angle when there was a whole second flank she hadn't thought to look at, because she'd been focused on Hale and the grant and the legal paper, and she had not thought hard enough about the land. "How much?" she said. "Clara, see Ethan. How much is the note?" He told her. She thought about the grant, about what the water rights were worth if properly licensed, if negotiated, not sold, not surrendered, licensed to the 6 outfits below that depended on it. She did the arithmetic in about 12 seconds. She looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at her. "The water rights," she said. "Are yours," he said. "If I license them," she said. "To the other ranchers, fair rate, them not Blackwell, and the income from the licensing would service the note," Aldrich said slowly. "Over time, not immediately." "No," she said. "Not immediately." She turned to Cutter. "How long does a foreclosure proceeding take in this territory?" "Filed in Bozeman comes through the district court." Cutter was already calculating 60 days minimum, more if it's contested. "Contest it," Clara said to Ethan. He looked at her. "Contest every step," she said. 60 days. We need 60 days. She turned to Aldrich. "Can we draft licensing agreements in 60 days?" "I can draft them in 60 hours if I need to," Aldrich said. "Then we need the other ranchers," Clara said. She turned to Margaret Oren. "The families below the creek, the ones who've been dealing with Blackwell's access restrictions for years. If we offer them fair water rights, guaranteed legal, their own license, no middleman, they'll come," Margaret said. And the way she said it, plain and certain, was the same way she'd said, "Don't run," the day before. Ethan stood in the middle of the street. He looked at Clara. And she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not gratitude, not relief, something rawer than that. The look of a man who has been alone in something for so long that the simple fact of someone standing in it with him has broken something open. "You figured that out," he said. "Just now." "I've been wrong about things," Clara said. "But not about water." His mouth moved. "Reckon not," he said. Behind them at the Grange house, Hale and his lawyers were reviewing a filing that was no longer the weapon they'd brought it to be. Price was on the eastbound. The grant was stamped on Cutter's desk. And Richard Hale, who had been 60 miles ahead of Clara Whitmore for 6 years, was sitting in a boarding house room in Montana, looking at a map, understanding slowly the way men like him understand things, that he had come a very long way to find a door that was already locked. It wasn't over. The mortgage was real. 60 days was not forever. Blackwell had not ridden into the street, and he had not conceded anything. And Clara knew that men like Blackwell never did their worst in public, but they had 60 days. And for the first time in 6 years, Clara Whitmore had something she hadn't let herself believe in. Time. 60 days sounds like a long time until you're in them. The first week was paperwork and cold coffee, and Aldrich at the kitchen table from 6 in the morning until his hands shook, which happened around 9 at night, and Clara would make him stop and eat something, and he would argue and eat it anyway. He was 80 years old, and he worked like a man who understood that some debts could only be paid in full. The licensing agreements took 11 days, not 60 hours. Aldrich had said 60 hours with the confidence of a man who had forgotten that Montana in October means 3 inches of snow on day 4, a frozen well on day 6, and Tom riding fence in conditions that made the paperwork feel easy. But on the 11th day, Aldrich set down his pen and pushed 3 documents across the kitchen table and said, "There. That's the Hendersons, the Rafter J, and the Cooley outfit. 3 signatures and we have enough income to service the note for 18 months. Clara looked at the documents. And Blackwell can't buy in. The licensing structure won't allow it. Any transfer to a party with existing water access claims in this county is void on its face. Aldrich folded his glasses. He can try to challenge it. The challenge would take 2 years. He doesn't have 2 years, Ethan said from the doorway. They both looked at him. Blackwell's been borrowing against his East Range, Ethan said. He came in and sat down and put his hat on the table, which he only did when something was heavy. Tom found out 3 days ago and I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure. I'm sure now. He's been using Hale's money to pressure the bank, and if Hale pulls back... Hale pulled back, Aldrich said. I know. Ethan looked at Clara. Hale sent a wire from Bozeman yesterday, dropped the incompetency filing, withdrew his lawyers. Clara sat very still. Why? She said. The letters, Aldrich said quietly. When he saw what Eleanor had written down, he understood what a territorial court proceeding would cost him, not money. He paused. Reputation. In Richmond. In Washington. He has ambitions beyond Montana, and a man with ambitions cannot afford to have a dead woman's handwriting read aloud in public. Clara looked at the table. She thought about her mother writing letters that would never be sent in a room where she was slowly dying in a house run by a man who had visited twice. She thought about the precision of it, the dates, the words, the care. A woman with no money and no property and no legal standing, and she had found the one thing she could give her daughter that no one could take back. The truth written down. All right, Clara said. Her voice was steady because she was going to let herself feel this later alone, when there was time. If Hale has pulled back and Blackwell is overextended, what does Blackwell do? Ethan picked up his hat. That, he said, is what I've been trying to figure out for 4 days. He found out on day 14 at 2 in the morning when Juno screamed. Clara was up before she was fully awake, which was a thing she had trained herself to do years ago in a house where sleeping soundly was a liability. She heard Ethan already in the hall, boots on, and she grabbed her coat and followed him out. The barn was lit orange. Not bright orange, not a full fire, not yet, but the low wrong glow of something catching that hadn't caught completely. And Ethan was running, and Clara was running, and Tom was already coming from the bunkhouse with a bucket. It was the hay. The east corner of the hay storage where the wall met the foundation, and someone had packed dry brush against the base from outside, and it was burning with the deliberate patience of a fire that had been set rather than started. Clara did not stop to think about it. She went to the well. She pulled. She ran. She came back and pulled again, and somewhere in there, Ethan was inside the barn getting the horses out, and Tom was throwing water at the base of the wall with the focused economy of a man who knew exactly how fast a barn goes once it decides to. And Clara kept pulling and running and pulling and running until her arms stopped feeling like arms and became something mechanical, something that existed only to move water from one place to another. Juno came out of the barn and Clara caught her without thinking, grabbed the halter with both hands while the mare was still sideways with panic, and held on. Just held on. Put her face against the horse's neck, the way she'd done in the round pen, and Juno shook and then went still. There, Clara said. There now. It took 40 minutes. 40 minutes, and they had it out, and the east wall was scorched, and the hay was lost, but the barn was standing, and the horses were in the yard, and Tom was sitting on a bucket with his hat off, and Ethan was standing looking at the base of the wall, where the brush had been piled. He crouched down. He pulled something from the ash. Clara came and looked. It was the stub of a brand. Not a Walker brand, an upside-down V over a bar. She looked at it. Ethan looked at it. "That's Blackwell's running iron," Tom said from the bucket. He said it flatly, the way you say a thing you're not surprised by. Ethan set it down. He straightened up. He stood there in the yard in the ash-smelling dark with his barn still smoking, and Clara watched his face, and what she saw there was not the anger she expected. It was something quieter and much more dangerous. It was the face of a man who has run out of patience with patience. "Ethan," she said. "I know," he said. "You can't ride out to Blackwell's tonight." "I know." "Because that's what he wants. He wants you to ride out there angry and do something that looks like, 'I know, Clara.'" He turned and looked at her, and his voice was tight and controlled, and she could see what it was costing him. "I know exactly what he wants, and I know what I want, and I know the difference, and I need about 10 minutes to let the difference settle in before I do anything." He looked at her. "Can you give me 10 minutes?" "Yes," she said. He walked out into the dark yard, and he stood there. Clara sat on the fence and waited. Tom came and stood beside her, and they both watched Ethan's shape in the dark, and Tom said quietly, "He hasn't let himself go like that since he lost them." "I know," Clara said. "You'd be good for him," Tom said. He stopped. "If I what?" Clara said. Tom turned his hat. "If you were staying." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I'm his wife," she said. "On paper." "Tom," she looked at him. "Hand me that brand." He handed it to her. She turned it over. Blackwell's iron scorched stupid with arrogance, the kind of mistake a man makes when he's running out of moves and knows it and panics. "A man who burns barns," Clara said, "is a man who's out of ideas." Tom looked at the iron. "Yeah," he said. "Reckon so." When Ethan came back, he had his face back. "Cutter," he said, "in the morning, with the brand." "Yes," Clara said. "And the other ranchers, the ones who signed the water agreements." He looked at her. "They need to know Blackwell's burning." "They already don't trust him," Clara said. "This will finish it." "It'll finish more than that." Ethan took the brand from her hand. "Blackwell's been controlling this valley for 20 years because people were afraid of what he could do. The day they see he burned a barn, not bought, not lawyered burned, they'll understand what kind of man has been running them." He was right. She knew he was right because she had watched men like Blackwell her whole life. Men who operated behind paper and courtesy and the appearance of reason. And she knew that the moment the mask came off, it was over. Not immediately, but over. The morning took longer than it should have because morning always does, and Crawford was late because Crawford was always late, and Cutter looked at the iron for a long time before he said anything. When he did, he said, "I'm going to need more than a brand." "Tom saw a rider come off the East Ridge at midnight," Ethan said. "East Ridge is Blackwell's land. Tom's your man. Tom's been in this county 15 years and has never lied to anyone, including me, on 2 occasions where lying to me would have been considerably to his benefit." Ethan said it without heat. "You know that, Bill." Cutter put the brand on his desk. "I know it," he said. He rubbed his face. "I'm going to ride out to Blackwell's this afternoon and ask him about it. He'll deny it. Of course he'll deny it. But a man who knows a sheriff is watching him burns fewer barns, and right now that might be worth more than an arrest I can't make stick." Cutter looked at Ethan. "Unless you want to take this to the district court. Full proceeding." Ethan looked at Clara. She thought about it. "Not yet," she said. "Not until we have the water agreement signed by all 6 outfits. Right now Blackwell's scared and making mistakes. Scared men who make mistakes are more useful than cornered men with lawyers." She paused. "Give him a week. If he burns something else, then court." Cutter looked at her for a moment. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "has anyone ever told you that you think like a sheriff?" "I've been told I think like several things," Clara said. "None of them flattering." Cutter almost smiled. "Week," he said. "Then we talk again." What happened next nobody quite planned. Margaret Orrin planned it if anyone did, but she would have denied it. It started with the Henderson family coming to the ranch on a Saturday to sign the water agreement, and Margaret happened to be there helping Clara with the curtains she'd bought thread for and never made. And the Hendersons stayed for coffee, and then the Rafter J came because they'd heard the Hendersons were there. And then it was noon. And somehow there were 11 people in Ethan Walker's kitchen and yard, and not enough chairs. They talked about the water. They talked about Blackwell. Margaret told them plainly what she knew about the brand, about the barn, about Hale pulling back. She said it the way she said everything as fact without drama, and the lack of drama made it more serious than drama would have. Old Pete Salazar was there. He said he'd heard Blackwell had called in 2 notes from smaller outfits on the South End which nobody had known about. The woman from the Cooley place. Vera Cooley, 40 years old, who had buried a husband and run 400 acres alone for 3 years, said she'd had a man come by last spring, offering to buy her water access rights, and she hadn't understood what he was buying at the time. Clara explained what he'd been buying. Vera Cooley's face went through several things. "How much did he offer you?" Clara said. Vera said, "The licensing income." Clara said carefully, "Once all 6 agreements are signed would be more than that per year, annually." Vera looked at her. "Recurring," Clara said. "Not a one-time payment. Every year." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "My husband's been trying to control this valley for 20 years, Ethan said. And Clara noticed he said my valley possessive, which was the first time she'd heard him claim it that way. Because the water's worth more than the land. It's always been worth more than the land. He knew it, and I didn't, and I've been fighting him with my hands tied because I didn't know what I was protecting." He looked at Clara when he said it. She looked back. And Vera Cooley said, "Where do I sign?" The 6th agreement went down on the table. On day 23. Signed by the last holdout outfit on the creek line, a stubborn Norwegian named Halvorsen, who had taken some convincing, not because he distrusted Clara, but because he distrusted paper in general, and contracts in particular, and had strong opinions about both. Aldrich had convinced him by reading the document aloud, in full word by word, which took 40 minutes, and was the most boring 40 minutes Clara had ever sat through, and at the end of it, Halvorsen nodded once and signed, and that was that. Aldrich sent the income projections to the bank in Bozeman on day 24. The bank responded on day 27. They would not call the mortgage. Ethan read the letter at the kitchen table, and he read it twice, and then he set it down, and he put both hands flat on the wood, and he sat there. Clara said nothing. She poured his coffee and sat across from him and waited. "It's done," he said. "The mortgage part," she said. "Yeah." He looked up. Blackwell. Blackwell lost his leverage when Hale pulled back. He's got money, but not enough money, and he's got influence, but not on water law, and he knows it. She folded her hands. "He'll try something else eventually. Men like him always do. But not today. Not today." Ethan looked at the letter. Then he looked at her. "Clara," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honest." "Always," she said. "When you picked my letter..." He stopped. Started again. "I know why you picked this ranch. I know about the creek and the grant and what you needed. And I know I told you it didn't matter, and I meant it." He kept his eyes on her face. "But I want to know if there was anything else. In that boarding house in Chicago. Reading 11 letters." He was very still. Was there anything else? Clara sat with it for a moment. She thought about the letter, about the 9 rewrites she'd imagined behind the final words about a man who knew what he had to offer and was honest about how small he thought it was. "Yes," she said. "What?" "I thought..." She folded her hands tighter. "I thought if I had to run toward something instead of away from something, I would rather run toward a man who knew what lonely was." She met his eyes. "I've been around men my whole life who had everything. Money power rooms full of people, and not one of them ever sat in a kitchen alone for 6 days until their voice rusted." She paused. "You knew what you'd lost. You knew what absence felt like. I thought a man like that might understand what I was carrying." She breathed. "I was right." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "That letter," he said quietly, "I threw away 8 times. I know. The version I sent was the worst one. It was the truest one. Something crossed his face, slow and certain, like weather moving in that you don't want to run from. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held on, and neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything else that needed to be said just then, and they had both spent enough of their lives saying things that didn't need to be said, and not saying the things that did. Outside, Juno was moving in the round pen, easy and loose, no longer afraid of her own shadow. The creek ran north to south across 400 acres of Montana and watered 6 outfits below, and it was Clara's, and it was Ethan's, and it was going to keep running long after both of them were gone. Aldrich left on the Tuesday train. He stood on the platform with his case in his hand and his hat on, and he looked at Clara for a long moment. "She would have loved this," he said. "Your mother. She would have been furious and proud in equal measure, and she would not have shown either." Clara's eyes went hot. "I know," she said. "She gave you everything she had." Aldrich said, "She gave you the truth and the water and the stubbornness and the precision, and you used every bit of it." He picked up his case. "Don't waste the rest." He got on the train. Clara watched it go east until it was gone. Then she turned around. Ethan was waiting with the wagon reins loose in his hands, looking at her with that steady look that she had stopped finding unsettling and started finding without quite meaning to like home. "Ready," she said. "Yep," he said. She climbed up. He turned the horses, and they drove back down the road to the ranch, and neither of them needed to say where they were going, because for the first time in a very long time, they were going to the same place. 6 months later, Victor Blackwell made his last move. Nobody expected it to be quiet. Men like Blackwell, in Clara's experience, ended loudly, a confrontation, a legal maneuver, a dramatic gesture that let them lose while still performing dignity. She'd been watching for loud. It wasn't loud. It was a letter. A single page delivered by a boy from town on a Wednesday afternoon, addressed to Ethan in a hand Clara didn't recognize. She was in the yard with Juno when it arrived, and she saw Ethan read it on the porch, and she watched his face, and her stomach turned over once, because his face went through 3 things in about 4 seconds, and then went very flat. He brought it to her. She read it. Blackwell was selling. Not the whole operation, not yet, but the East Range. The section that controlled the gap in the fence where Price had ridden through the land that backed up against the north line of Ethan's property. He was selling it, and he was giving Ethan first right of purchase, and the price was fair. Genuinely fair. Not generous, not insulting. Fair. At the bottom, in Blackwell's own hand below the typed body of the letter, "I backed the wrong play. I don't make a habit of admitting that. Consider this the exception." Clara read that line twice. "He's getting out," Ethan said. "He's cutting his losses," Clara said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Not much of one." Ethan took the letter back. He looked at it for a moment. "Can we buy it?" And that was the question. Wasn't it? 6 months ago, the answer would have been absolutely not. Not, with the mortgage and the note and every dollar spoken for 3 times over. But 6 months of water licensing income had changed the arithmetic in ways Clara was still sometimes surprised by, and she had spent the last 3 months being surprised by what it felt like to not be in crisis. "Yes," she said, "if we want to." "Do we want to?" Clara looked at the north line where the fence ran, where the gap had been cut and repaired, and where Tom had replaced the wire with something heavier that nobody was going to get through easily again. "Controlling the east approach," she said slowly, "means nobody else can put a man through that gap, ever. Which means the survey access to the creek from that side becomes ours to manage." She folded her arms. "And it means Blackwell's successor, whoever buys the rest of his operation, eventually starts with a boundary that works in our favor instead of theirs." Ethan nodded. "So yes," Clara said. "We want to." He sent the reply that afternoon. They closed on the East Range 40 days later in Crawford's office, which smelled like ink and old wood, and the particular anxious energy of a small man doing work that was larger than his office. And when it was done, Ethan shook Crawford's hand, and Clara shook Crawford's hand, and Crawford looked like a man who had not expected his professional life to get this interesting this late in it. Tom was waiting outside with the wagon. "Well," he said. "Ours," Ethan said. Tom grinned. It was the first full grin Clara had seen on his face since the barn fire, and it looked right on him like something that belonged there. "Halverson's going to be pleased," Tom said. "He's been worried about who'd buy it." "Halverson worries about everything," Ethan said. "He worries in Norwegian," Tom said, "which makes it worse because nobody knows when he's done." Clara laughed, and it came out easy, without the surprised quality it used to have, which she had noticed a few weeks ago and filed away to think about later. Laughter had stopped catching her off guard. She wasn't sure exactly when that had happened. She thought probably it had happened the same way most things had happened in the last 6 months, gradually, and then all at once, and without permission. They were 2 miles out from town when Ethan said without any particular lead-in, "I need to show you something when we get back." "What kind of something?" "The kind that's been in my coat pocket for 3 weeks, and I've been trying to find the right time for, and Tom told me last Tuesday that I was being a coward, and I told him he was wrong, and then I couldn't sleep for 4 nights, so apparently he was right." Clara turned and looked at him. Tom on the seat behind them in the wagon bed suddenly became very interested in the horizon. "3 weeks," she said. "I know. You've had something in your pocket for 3 weeks." "I'm aware of how that sounds." "Ethan?" "It's in the coat in the front room," he said. "I'll get it when we get home. I'm telling you now so I don't lose my nerve again between here and there." Clara looked at the road. She pressed her lips together very carefully. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was completely different from the comfortable ones they'd built over 6 months. This one had electricity in it. The kind that lives in the air before a storm, not threatening, just present the atmosphere of something about to break open. Tom unhitched the horses with the focused efficiency of a man who understands his role in a situation and intends to discharge it as quickly as possible and then be elsewhere. He was elsewhere in about 4 minutes. Clara and Ethan went inside. He went to the front room. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him go to the coat on the hook by the door and reach into the inside pocket and stand there for a moment with his back to her and his hand inside the coat not moving. "Ethan," she said. "1 second. You've had 3 weeks." "I know, Clara." He turned around. He was holding a ring. It was small and plain, a gold band with a single dark red stone set flush. Not raised, not elaborate. The kind of ring a man picks because it's the right ring, not because it's impressive. He held it in his palm. "I know we did it backward," he said. "I know we got married before we knew each other and the whole thing was—" He stopped, looked at the ring. "You came here because you needed this ranch. I know that. And I married you because you needed it, and because—" Another stop. "Because I read your letter back 11 times, the one you sent through the agency. And in it you wrote that you wanted to be somewhere that chose you back. And I couldn't stop thinking about that sentence." He looked up. "I want to choose you back, Clara, not because of the creek or the grant or what you brought here, because you showed me what it looked like to fight for something, and you showed me what it looked like to be afraid and do the thing anyway. And you showed me—" His voice went rough at the edges, just slightly. "You showed me what this place is supposed to feel like. I didn't know before you got here. I thought I did. I didn't." Clara stood in the kitchen doorway. She was not going to cry in the kitchen doorway. She had cried in this kitchen already the first night, and that had been enough. "You wrote the letter 9 times, she said. "The one to the agency." He blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because the version you sent reads like a 9th draft, she said. "All the unnecessary things have been taken out, and what's left is only what you couldn't take out. That's what a 9th draft looks like." She pushed off the doorframe and walked toward him. I wrote my letter to the agency 14 times, Ethan. And in the 12th draft I wrote that I wanted someone who understood silence, and I took it out, because I thought it was too much to ask for. She stopped in front of him. He was looking at her with those steady eyes. It wasn't too much, he said. No, she said. It wasn't. He held out the ring. She put out her hand and he slid it on and it fit, which meant he had measured without her knowing and had not asked her. Size had figured it out himself somehow from looking, and that small piece of evidence of private attention hit her somewhere under the sternum and stayed there. She looked at the ring on her hand. Then she looked up at him. Ethan, she said, I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear it without arguing. That's how you start every conversation that wins. I know, listen. She kept her eyes on his. I came here with $14 and my mother's letters and a land grant and a plan, and the plan was to survive. That was all. To get far enough away and find solid enough ground that I could just survive. She let that word sit. I did not come here looking for this. For a man who holds paper over a fire and gives it back. For a kitchen with coffee already made and a bolt on the door and a horse that trusts me and Tom's terrible jokes and Margaret Oren calling me by my first name. Her voice stayed even barely. I did not come here looking for a life. I came here to stop running long enough to breathe. Ethan said nothing. He was listening the way he always listened, completely without preparation for his response, without waiting for his turn. Just hearing. What I found, Clara said, was better than what I would have asked for, because I had forgotten how to ask. She curled her fingers around his. I chose your letter. I chose this ranch. I chose this fight, and I am choosing this. She held his gaze. That is not obligation. That is not survival arithmetic. Do you hear me? Yes, he said. Good, she breathed. Don't make me say it twice. He brought her hand up. He held it for a moment. Then he said very quietly, I haven't said grace over a meal in 5 years. I stopped after Sarah. I didn't see the point anymore. He looked at their hands. I said it last Thursday. Over eggs. He looked up. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how to say what it meant. But you should know. Clara understood exactly what it meant. It meant he had stopped grieving long enough to be grateful. It meant she had not replaced what he'd lost. Nothing could. But she had given him something to wake up for that wasn't just stubbornness and habit, and that was its own thing new and entirely theirs. She stood on her toes and kissed him. It was the first time. 6 months of marriage, and the first time which under other circumstances might have seemed absurd. But under these circumstances was simply true, and the truth of it made it the kind of thing neither of them forgot. When she pulled back, his eyes were still closed for a second. All right, she said. All right, he said. And his voice was different, rougher, and he was looking at her like a man seeing something he'd been trying not to want. From outside, Tom's voice carried across the yard with the particular timing of a man who had been listening for a signal. I'm going to go check the north fence. Could take a while. Might take the rest of the day. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Tom, he called. Boss? You're getting a raise. I know, Tom said. Already planned on it. They heard his boots cross the yard, and then the sound of a horse, and then nothing. And the house was quiet in the way it used to be quiet before Clara had arrived, except it wasn't the same quiet at all. This one had warmth in it. This one had 2 cups on the table, and a ring on a woman's hand, and eggs still warm on the stove from breakfast. This one was chosen. The creek ran north to south across the Walker land all that winter, and the winter after, and the one after that. It watered 6 outfits below, and the agreements held, and the income came in regular as the seasons. Blackwell sold the rest of his operation in the spring, and left the county without ceremony, which was the most dignified exit available to him, and he took it. Hale's name appeared once more 2 years later in a newspaper from Richmond that Margaret Orrin received from her sister and passed to Clara without comment. He had retired from business. The article described his many civic contributions and made no mention of Montana. Clara read it at the kitchen table and set it down and poured herself more coffee, and that was that. Aldrich wrote twice-a-year letters so precise and dry they made her smile every time, and when he died in 1884, he left her his law books and a short note that said, "Only, your mother was right about you. So was I." J.A. Clara kept the note with her mother's letters in the oilcloth in the drawer beside the bed. Tom married the following spring, the Cooley widow Vera, which surprised everyone except Clara, who had seen it coming since the afternoon they'd all sat around the kitchen table, and Vera had watched Tom eat 2 biscuits without commenting on them being slightly burnt, which Clara had recognized as a woman deciding she liked someone, and Ethan Walker, who had asked a mail-order agency for a quiet woman because he had forgotten he deserved more than quiet, built his fence line north and ran his cattle different, and said grace on Thursdays, and sometimes looked across whatever room Clara was in with an expression that he'd stopped trying to hide around month 4. She caught him at it one morning. He didn't look away. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Ethan." "I'm just looking," he said. "I'm allowed to look." She went back to what she was doing and did not let him see that her hands had gone still for a moment. The storm that had come off that eastbound train on a dusty platform in the summer of 1881 had not destroyed anything. It had swept the place clean the way a real storm does, taken off the rotted wood and the loose things and the structures that were only standing out of habit, and what was left when it passed was solid and real and chosen, built by 2 people who had both run out of easier options and found at the end of the running that this was the option they would have chosen anyway. Clara Walker had come to Willow Creek to survive. She stayed because she had finally found something worth more than surviving. She stayed because she was home.